hang on a second.
I'll give a brief summary.
Give a brief summary. Good.
Okay, so if people travel, the question was about someone traveling and they're in transit at the airport, or they're waiting to catch a flight, and they have their tefillin in a transparent bag. The question was asked on this halacha website, can they go into a bathroom with the tefillin that the tefillin can be seen? So the answer is no, because it's a holy object. Rather give it to somebody, or if you have a carry-on that's made of normal material that's dark, it's not going to be transparent, then it's okay. If it's inside your case, it's okay. But someone obviously thought that was a relevant question. Then secondly, another question is about counting Jews. And someone asked the question, are you allowed to count Jews for a minyan? If you're waiting for the 10 before you start, you can start, you just can't do Kadesh and Baruch Hu, etc. How do you do it? So you can't say 1, 2, 3, you say not 1, not 2, not 3. And some people say 1 potato, 2 potato, or something like that. They also, some people are creative with the accounting methods.
So do you know where that was derived? It was derived from when we give in the Mishkan, the half shekel. It was derived that...
That's right.
On the head, counted on the head. Yeah,
correct.
I think, huh?
Okay. So let me just do a minute or two review on yesterday. So the whole thing of it yesterday was, firstly, how do we know how to take the context of how much the damager must pay? Because if you take it at the market-related price, just on what's harvested, it's going to be an exorbitant amount. Gavin and I are of the opinion that in a way it makes sense, because if you're the one damaged, you're losing that amount. But there are factors like, will the harvest come to fruition? Would it be qualitatively as good? Is there a sort of compromise between the damager and the damaged, etc.? So how did this occur? Because Rav Masna said, look, we can learn in Gezerah Shava. Because the verse states in Shmot, Exodus chapter 22, verse 4, the following. It says, if a man will lead an animal to a field or vineyard, and he sends forth his animal, and it consumes in the field of another, the choicest of his field and the choicest of his vineyard he shall pay. Now, in other words, the Torah could have written, and it consumes in a field. It added the words in the field of another. And when it said in the field of another, it's to teach that in context of the damage, you can't just see it in an isolated area where it damaged in that particular bed of produce, but in relation to a much larger area, if it's appraised in that way and not by itself, that you're not going to have to pay a unfairly high price for the damage that your animal caused. Okay. It also uses the term in the field of another, not just the field of another, because the word in, the prefix, is actually coming to teach something else, is that we have to learn that it's not just talking about this issue of assessment of payment, but it's also talking about the fact that you have to pay in the field of another as opposed to the public domain. In other words, we're learning that you have to exclude a public domain because it doesn't particularly belong to one person, it belongs to everybody. So those two lessons can be learned. And also the fact of it is we learn this from the word when it says, and it consumes in the field of another, because what your question might be is that, okay, so you come to see about payment, that you assess the damage in the context of a larger field that has been damaged. But how do you know this has to do with a consuming issue where the animal is excluded from payment in the public domain? And it uses the word, and it consumes in the field of another. So part of that pasuk is talking about payment, and part of it is talking about the area where the consumption of the food occurs. Okay? So then we learned that, and we say, okay, so we learn it in the greater context of the field, how much is that field in terms of size? So we said we evaluated on the base se'ah itself. And what does that mean? Is that it's a base se'ah is an area that's 50 amos by 50 amos. And what did Kevin say that was? 25 square meters. Is that what you said, Kev?
Yeah, 25 square meters, yeah.
25 square meters, okay. But according to Gedushin 60b and Arachin 25a, the Rambam said that that's the area of land in which a se'ah of seed is sown, with obviously the right sort of spacious amount. But the calculation can't be based on the price of a base se'ah on its own, because that would result again in the issue of it being seen only within its own context and not in the greater context of land. And then the appraisal is going to be too high. Why? Because it's generally that sort of small area is not available for sale by itself to the average person. It's sold to the majority of poor people who can't afford larger tracts of land. And when they buy these small parcels of land, in view of the low supply and high demand, they command a very, very high price. And the problem is if you just take the land in context with the area damaged and say, well, we're building it basically just on the base of the damaged produce, it would be a proportionately large payment. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to say that it's in this concept of 1 in 60. Now we have this concept of 1 in 60 quite often. Kevin, if you look at this concept of kashrut, if you look at a concept of sleep is 1/60th of death. Kashrut, 1/60th.
Little barov.
Exactly. Explain this to us, because you taught it to us recently.
Okay, so bittul barov is a concept. If you're making a meat soup or a soup in a meat pot, and you drop a tiny little bit of milk in it, if it's not gonna trafe it up. It's not gonna mevatel it as a kosher dish. If it's 1/60th or more of the total quantity, so it's called bittul. It doesn't. The 99% of the quantity bittles or negates the tiny drop of milk that fell in it. It's because it's insignificant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what we learn then is there's a difference between a se'ah and a base se'ah. So base se'ah is the amount of seeds that are sown within in the ground to be able to develop a se'ah, which is a measure of volume. So there's 6 covs in a se'ah and 30 se'ahs in a kor. I'm going to go through what that measurement means, but it just means that you need 50 amos by 50 amos of land in which a se'ah of seed is sown to get that sort of volume of produce, okay? So what happens is Rav Yossi Bar Chanina said we evaluate the base se'ah in relation to 60 base se'ahs. So in other words, it's 1 in 60. Does that make sense? We're going to go through what that means. Now that's the first opinion, Rav Yossi Bar Chanina. We evaluate the damage of a base se'ah in relation to 60 base se'ahs. Rav Yanai said we evaluate a base tarkov, which is what, guys, we went through it yesterday.
6 kav, isn't it? Or 6 se'ah?
No. Okay.
6.
So yes, you're correct. But let's go through a simple explanation of what a base tarkov is. Kevin's correct. Is that a tarkov is half a base se'ah. So in other words, we take a base tarkov in relation to 60 base tarkov, which is 30 base se'ah. So in other words, it's still a ratio of 60, but we take half the size. So again, there's Rav Yossi Bar Chanina that says we take a base se'ah of damage, and then we volumetrically multiply that by 60 to see its overall context value. Okay, and Rav Yanai says we take a base Kabb, which is half a base se'ah, and then we times that by 60 base Kabb. So we're still doing it times a formula of 60, but we're dealing with half the area of land. And we're going to discuss why, how they come to that sort of difference. And then obviously we've got Chizkiah, who says we evaluate a stalk in relation to 60 stalks. So they always have this calculation of 1 in 60, but they're using different units of measurement. All I want to know is, Arthur, are you with me? I know you're pacing in and out, but can you hear me, even though you're not in camera view?
He's
Okay, can you answer questions?
measuring to see how many se'ah his kitchen is. How many base se'ah?
Yeah, the one to do with seeds, the other one to do with land, and the 160th. I got that.
Okay, but that's how you
space out.
Okay, no, but you're missing something. I want to know. I want to know for a base Tarkov, is it times 30 or times 60, and why?
I'll say it's times 30 because I haven't seen the logical one. And why, I have no idea. I was strictly guessing on that.
Okay, so are you listening in truth, or are you trying to do more than one thing?
I'm listening, but I'm trying to cook supper at the same time, trying to get food ready.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let me then just, can I then kidnap you for 1 minute just to share the screen, and then I'm not going to bother you again for the screen. Is it a bad
Give
time?
me like for 20 seconds while I put the light in the microwave to cook.
Sure, 100%.
I have to
100%.
Sorry. Just washing a plate.
1 second.
Anything ready here? Sausages out. Once it's cooking in the microwave, hold on, Nate, I'm a little busy. Captain really kills us. Oh, is that for them? You watched it. Put a plate from there. Okay.
Damon, did you understand my joke?
Did you type a joke somewhere?
No, but I said you after you sent this earlier.
Totally, yeah. I did.
Okay, I'm yours for 4.5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. That's all I need. All right. So, guys, I wrote this. Excuse my handwriting. So, all right. Both Rav Yossi and Rav Yana say we make two calculations. So Rav Yossi Bar Chanina says, look, the first calculation is we have to arrive at the value of a base se'ah, and we calculate a 60th of 60 base se'ahs. Okay, so if you sell a base se'ah on its own at 15 gold coins, that's the problem, because that's what you'd sell it to a poor person at. But if you take a field measuring 60 base se'ahs, it would only cost you 600 gold coins because you're buying in volume. And therefore, if you divide that by 60, how much is each se'ah worth, guys?
10 gold coins.
10 gold coins. So you're not paying a premium if you took it in a context of only one base se'ah, which is important because you're not paying the exorbitant rates that they charge to the poor. So you're paying in context of the market-related rate, if you will, of average means. So once you've done that adjustment for the fair rate, you have to make the second calculation. So if the base sale was sold for that price, how much would be deducted to account for the damage? That's what has to be paid. So obviously, if your cow ate a base sale and a half, you're paying 15 gold coins. You get it, but at least you're not paying 27.5 gold coins. It's a hell of a difference. Does that make sense, guys?
So let's just repeat that.
Okay. So what we're saying is you can't work a base sale on its own because you're paying the highest value, because poor people can only afford a base sale. So they sell it at top dollar. So it's equivalent, Kevin, to you buying a can of Coke as opposed to buying a 2 liter of Coke. If you go to a 24-hour shop and you go to the engine garage and you buy a can of Coke after hours, you're going to pay more than a 2-liter bottle of Coke at Pick and Pay during normal hours. Does that make sense in terms of the value? Not in terms of the total amount, it will still be less, but in terms of the value, you're not getting volume discount. So that's why we make a base hour, and we say you have to times it by 60th, because that's the reasonable price at what you pay in volume. So instead of paying one base hour at 15 gold coins, if you bought 60, you would only pay 600 gold coins, which is 10 gold coins per base hour. So therefore, once you've got that 10 gold coin ratio per base hour, you look at the proportional percentage of damage and you times it by that discounted rate. Very straightforward. Okay. Now, Rav Chizkiah has got a different calculation. He says you take 100 stalks of grain that were damaged, for example, and you times it by 60. That's 6,000 stalks in a field proportionately, and that's how you work out the damage. What would the field of stalks with 6,000 stalks be worth less if 100 stalks were damaged? That's Rav Chizkiah's opinion. He said whatever the damage is, you just times by 60. It doesn't work on a base hour. Arthur, have I still got you for a minute? I've got you for a minute and a half left. Arthur? Mate? Arthur, you want to unmute yourself? Calling Arthur. More calling. Arthur, you with me, mate? Okay. So, Ravianai, Arthur, are you there?
Yes, I pushed pen by mistake. I almost drew on the screen, okay?
Okay.
There's a pen, look, if I push pen, I can draw on the screen.
Okay.
I pushed it by mistake.
All right.
Push erase.
Okay,
So,
no problem.
Erase it now, sorry.
All right, no
I
problem.
got rid of it, but
All right.
now I know how to get back to this.
All right.
Okay, carry on, yeah?
Now, Raviana is saying that that's not a fair price because you're paying too little. The damaged party is getting too little. So he's basically saying you have to work it at a base Tarkov. Okay? So base Tarkov is half a base hour. So he says, again, you do the same sort of calculation. But 60 base Tarkov is actually 30 base hour. But that would fetch 360 gold coins, not 300 gold coins. So you're getting 60 gold coins more. So when you say 360 gold coins for a base Tarkov and you divide it by 60, each base Tarkov is worth 6 gold coins. And to get the rate of a base Tarkov, you times it by 2, which is what Kevin was talking about, the 6 gold coins. And that equals 12 gold coins for a base hour. So he's saying the right price for a base hour, for example, would be 12 gold coins, not 10. Does that make
reasonable price, you mean, Damon?
Yes.
Reasonable price.
Reasonable. Well, what did I say? Yeah, what did I say?
I think you maybe said right. Did you say right? You said maybe you said right.
Well, it is the right price because the thing of it is it's the reasonable price. Again, there's a balance, Kev. You don't want the damaged party to get too little either. You know what I mean?
Sure. Otherwise, it's not really not fair. Yeah.
It's not fair, exactly. So those are the two. Those are the three opinions. All right. Now Arthur can go back to cooking. We can discuss it from there. Did the chart help at all that I wrote?
Yeah.
All right.
Still tricky.
No, actually, Damon, what you explained was very good. The thing is, which I may not have got when I went over the material, is that most people can only afford 50 amot by 25 amot by 25 amot piece of land there, and there's a demand that pushes the price up. That's what you explained. That made it more understandable.
Yeah. Look, I don't understand, to be honest, why the damager is given the benefit of the discount since the poor are not. I mean, the damager is actually trespassing, put in wrong. Just saying.
Yeah.
It's difficult to understand it. But, I mean, why should they get the discount? But for whatever reason, If I was the damaging part, if I was the damager, I'd probably be grateful. Depends which side of the fence you're on. So anyway, those are the three opinions. But again, in summary, okay, Rav Yossi Bachelina says we work on Beis in relation to 60 Beis. Rav Yana says we evaluate a Beis Takav, which is half a Beis in relation to 60 Beis Takav, which would give you a balance between what the poor pay and the super rich get discounted. It would be what you call it middle income rate. Okay, and you've got Hiskia. It says we evaluate a stalk in relation to 60 stalk. So it says you just times it by 60 and that would give you the balance. So Rav Hiskia just sees it as a principle. He doesn't say that you have to take a specific size of tract of land. Does that make sense? So
he's just spreading it over the 60.
Correct.
To make it more
Correct.
reasonable. Yeah.
Now the Gemara is going to challenge all these three opinions. Why? Because there's a brisa that says if an animal ate a cov or two covs of produce, don't say to the owner, pay their value. Okay? In other words, the value of the produce detached from the ground. Rather, we view the produce as though it is in a small plot and we evaluate it. I'm going to repeat this again, but before we repeat it, I actually just want to show something on the screen that I forgot to for Arthur. Sorry, mate. I'm really sorry. I know you got your hands full. Sorry, but one last time. I see, Arthur. I'm sorry, mate. All right.
Finished. I'm relaxing on the couch.
Okay. So this is a core is actually an area. So it's what you call the square meterage. That's a field. It's a core of produce. And a core equals 30 se'as, okay, or 180 cups. A cup is a volume of food that's produced in a field. It's 1/6 of a se'ah. Now, I want to explain to you something in case you think the math doesn't make sense. Because how can a cup it can 1/6 equals 30 se'ah. If you have 180 divided by 6, 6 3s are 18. Does that make sense, guys? The math works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a kav is a volume of food that's produced, it's harvested. A core is an area of land. So 30 se'ah equals 180 cups. A cup is not appraised on its own, but part of a larger field. So even though you're talking about volume, you're not talking about volume as in harvested in and of itself. That's what I wanted to share. So the question now of the Bryce is going to make a little bit more sense. And it basically says that the Gemara challenges it from the following brisa. If an animal ate a kav or two covs of produce, we don't say to the owner, pay their value. In other words, the value of the produce detached from the ground. Rather, we view the produce as though it is in a small plot and we evaluate it. So this is exactly a proof to say that you don't sell it at market-related value. It says because it's viewed as though it's in a small plot and we evaluate it. But the implication of that is what? Is that it seems to imply maybe that you evaluate the plot of land in and of itself. You could come to think that. Do you see what I'm saying? Because the Brisa doesn't say otherwise, it implies that the devastated area is assessed on its own and not part of a larger field. So that's the question that comes up by Rashba and Rashi. And that would even contradict our Mishnah, but the Gemara answers no. The Brisa could mean that we make the evaluation in a proportion of 1 to 60. The only thing that this is coming to prove is that you don't take it as harvested market-related value. And you take it within the land itself. But it doesn't mean you don't see the plot of land in context to the bigger land, because we learn the Gezerah Shava from Shemot chapter 22, verse 2, verse 4. Okay. So how long have we got left, Arth?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay. So the Gemara teaches, there's a cryptic brisa that says, the rabbis taught in a brisa, we do not evaluate a kav because it profits him. And we do not evaluate a base core because it depletes him. So what's the brisa say? So Rav Papa explains this as follows, is that when it's saying we do not evaluate a kav in relation to 60 kavs, because it profits the damager. How does it profit the damager? Because according to Rav Papa, the brisa presumes that our Mishnah's ruling is that the devastated area isn't appraised on its own, but it's a deduction from the price of a larger field. So if a kav of produce is destroyed, and if you take it 60 times as large, it would benefit the damager because it's an unfairly small payment. Why? Because if you look at a field that produced 60 kavs, it's cheap. Why is it cheap? Because it's difficult to sell. Because it's too large for poor people, so there's not a big demand. And it's too small for anybody else. It's at that size where the middle class don't want it because you can't really do anything, and the poor don't want it because they can't afford it. So it's at that shocking rate where it's super cheap. And then the second factor is that a kav in that area is too small to be noticeable in a larger field, so you'd hardly get anything for your money because there's hardly a loss that you'd notice. Because again, the land would be sold rather cheaply because it's an odd size, and the damage within that land is hardly noticeable. So the damaged party would get hardly anything. So that's not fair to the damaged party. So it benefits the damager. So that's the problem about assessing a kav in relation to 60 kavs. It's problematic. And you can't evaluate a core in relation to 60 cores. Why? Because it depletes the damager. What do we mean? Is that the damager is paying an unnecessary higher amount. If you say that a core is 30 se'ah or 180 kavs, that price of the field is quite expensive. Why? Because only the super rich can afford to buy it. So you would say, but then surely the super rich should get a discount. No, they don't. For one particular reason, is that what happens with a rich person is they don't want to live around middle class people. They're snobs. So what would mean is if they buy a small tract of land, people would come to them, can I borrow money? My horse has died of syphilis. My wife's not well. The kids need schooling. They don't want neighbors. They want to stay next to rich people. And what happens if they buy a small tract of land is they then have to keep buying the neighbors, and the neighbors hold out for a much bigger price. So what they want is to buy the land once and then create a whole estate, not to buy pockets of land and wait for neighbors to move. And therefore they're paying premium prices because they're getting a particular size of land. Does that make sense? Which means that the damager is overpaying. So that's the first reason. And also the amount, if you have a look at the amount of damage that a core is, it's so big that the devastation would be overly conspicuous even in a big field. So what it has to do is you have to still reduce it as though it was divided into 30 se'ahs. Okay, so in other words, what you do is we'll look at the calculation tomorrow. If a kav or core is damaged, but we still make it in where it's market related for the middle class. Okay, but we'll show you tomorrow how the calculation is done. I think you've done enough of calculations tonight.
Yeah, scarf, Damon. Thank you.
Thanks, Damon.
Pleasure.
What time tomorrow? I can't remember what the story is.